This is Sales Management Mastery, Episode 13.
Welcome to Sales Management Mastery, where you get an insider's look on how to build, motivate, coach, and lead a high-performance, low-maintenance sales team. Here's your host, Ralph Burns.
Hello and welcome to Sales Management Mastery online at salesmanagementmastery.com. And we're here to help you and your sales managers build a team of highly motivated, elite salespeople using easy-to-use, real-world sales management techniques that'll unleash a flood of new sales for your sales organization. On this episode of Sales Management Mastery, we go into part 2 of our series on the 7 forces of sales motivation. And we continue with forces 5 through 7 and further develop our understanding of the psychology behind motivating salespeople. Now, just as a quick review, we went through our first 4 of the 7 forces of sales motivation on last week's episode. And on this week's episode, we'll finish up with 5 through 7. So, just to reiterate, the 7 forces of sales motivation are as follows: the need for belonging, the need for independence, the need for importance, the need for knowledge, the need for assertiveness, which we'll start on today, the need for recognition, and lastly, the need for affiliation. Now, these 7 independent forces are extremely powerful forces that push your salespeople towards their ultimate goals. Sometimes they're group goals, sometimes they're company goals, and sometimes, and more often than not, what really drives a salesperson is their individual goals, their individual forces of motivation. They can be a part of an organization or a sales team or your sales team and be very motivated to produce for that sales team, but ultimately most people do want to achieve for themselves and to achieve their own intrinsic motivations. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about 7 forces of intrinsic, sort of internal motivation that drives them towards what they ultimately want to achieve. So as salespeople, and as we've talked about in previous episodes here on Sales Management Mastery, the most important thing for you to do as a sales motivator and as a sales manager, and to get your sales managers to do this on a consistent basis, is to figure out what makes your salespeople tick. Because if you can't do that, if you don't do that, and you try and motivate them the way that you are motivated, or maybe the way that you think that they should be motivated, just throwing out sort of a catch-all phrase like all salespeople are motivated by money, which is partially true. Most are motivated by money to a certain extent, but it's not their true driver. It's not their true motivator. Because if you interview 100 salespeople, you'll find out that, yes, motivation by money is certainly one of those factors. But if that's the only thing that you are using to motivate your salespeople, then you're not using all the tools in the tool belt, so to speak. And that's what this show and previous shows on sales motivation really are about, is to give you as many tools as possible and to use them as best as you can to apply them into your daily routines. So the 7 forces of motivation, or sales motivation rather, are more an awareness to get you and understand exactly what motivates your salespeople. And let's get right into numbers 5 through 7 here. And then for other shows, like I'd mentioned before, we're going to get into a little bit more about how we can use these forces of motivation to really drive your salespeople to ultimate sales, peak sales performance, and to get them to the top of the sales charts, and to get you and your company to achieve the sales revenue goals that you so desire. So number 5 is assertiveness, the need to be assertive. Now, a salesperson's need to assert themselves is in a lot of cases, I think a lot of sales managers would look at this as probably a pretty negative thing, is that the ones that really want to assert themselves are typically the ones that are loudest in the sales meeting, always talking about in my territory, and always think that whatever their agenda is the most important one. Now, I think we've all had salespeople on our sales teams that have been like this, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it's actually sort of neutral if you can harness it in the right way. And this can be manifested, and this kind of motivation can be manifested in outright leadership of a group, positive or negative leadership. It can bring down an entire group, and it can also raise up an entire group. And this is a tricky one to motivate by. This is probably out of the 7, this is probably the most difficult one, or the most challenging one to motivate by, especially if you do your own profile as we're going through the 7 forces of motivation. Assertiveness is not one of your top 7 forces of motivation. So, like I said, it can be manifested in leadership, but it can also be manifested in domineering or combative or boorish kind of behaviors. And I've certainly seen both manifest themselves in individual salespeople that I've managed in the past. So the assertive sales rep, or the one that has this desire, this inherent need for assertiveness, is the one who is the loudest, they're most vocal. And sometimes they even get to the point where they even bully your operations department at times, and they push the envelope at times as far as what would be considered in good taste. Sometimes it does get very difficult to deal with these types of people, but nonetheless, instead of harping on or really instead of highlighting the negative aspects of this personality, this type of personality can actually be used for a very positive leadership role and can help steer the rest of your salespeople to the right direction, the direction that you're heading and the direction that your company's heading. So they desperately crave to wield their influence and need their opinions and their thoughts to be listened to without a question. And these salespeople typically will sell by force and even maybe coercion at times, but can be extremely persuasive if this is channeled by you, the sales manager, correctly. So this is one that's a little bit more difficult or more challenging to wield and to manifest and to harness, but nonetheless, it is a very powerful motivator, and these are sometimes the best leaders after their sales role, especially if they want to move forward in the organization. Number 6 is the need for recognition. Now, most salespeople are driven by a need for recognition, and I think most people in general are driven by a need to be recognized. But these people are actually more so than the rest. They really love to receive acknowledgement for their accomplishments, and these accomplishments are extremely important for them. And CEO circles, President's Club awards, anything that has a public recognition or a public praising is a huge motivator for them. So somebody who's motivated by recognition, this is a very easy one to use on the whole in order to motivate them to top sales performance. So it's always interesting to maybe know where and